The giant Earthship Ark, drifting through deep space over 800 years into the far future. Its passengers, the descendants of the last survivors of the dead planet Earth, locked in separate worlds, heading for destruction. Unless three young people can save the Starlost.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Remembering Science Fiction Television Shows of the 1960s and 1970s. I'm Roy Bjellquist, and joining me tonight is my co-host, and this is Mr. Bruce Playfair. Thank you, Bruce, for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Roy. Excellent. If somebody had told me that I'd be live streaming about the Starlost, I think I would have laughed at them. But here we are.
Here we are with episode number 9, The Starlost. A lot of my Canadian friends, yourself included, had told me about this series and mentioned it at various science fiction conventions. And it was a show, I will be honest with you, that I had never actually heard of and really did not know a lot about. It wasn't really until last year that I started doing some research to find out a little bit about it and be exposed to it. And I watched the first 2 episodes, and I guess this was last year, and it was definitely interesting. It definitely is something from the 1970s, no doubt. And it definitely has a feel and a tone of its own. But it was definitely my first exposure, and it's crazy to think that this is a 47-year-old TV show that premiered and was filmed in Canada, your home stomping grounds.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, it's something that if you were, inclined to like science fiction and of the right age, it's something you couldn't get rid of. It was on CTV, which is one of our biggest national broadcasters. So you ran into it either in first run or syndication at some point. And the phrase, "May I be of assistance," was a real geek catchphrase for, again, people of a certain generation.
Isn't it amazing how things of that nature take place? I mean, in the 60s, and yes, folks, I am going to go right with Star Trek. So just clear your heads. Everything, all roads lead back to Star Trek. I mean, live long and prosper. I mean, that's a phrase that that took on a meaning of its own. And then to your point, what's the Starlost, something like that happening as well. And the interesting thing about the Starlost is it was a creation of Harlan Ellison, who was a renowned writer for science fiction. He was involved in it, as well as Douglas Trumbull also was involved. And Douglas Trumbull was known for The Silent Running, and then also, of course, who could ever forget 2001: Space Odyssey that premiered in 1968. I mean, that was
something called The Motion Picture too, I think.
Yes, and that's true too. Motion picture. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of history. There's a lot of groundbreaking science fiction, authorship there. And then also just with, the personalities and the people that were involved in it. I mean, there was a lot. And honestly, the premise for this show was good. I mean, it involved, the Earth essentially being destroyed, and they constructed, which was essentially an ark, almost like a Noah's Ark for space, and sending, humans out into space, to, colonize. Now, a lot of times this, type of storyline has been utilized. I mean, we saw it with the Robinson family in Lost in Space, Space Family Robinson, and then, it turned into Lost in Space. But the whole premise of the show was excellent. And I think that had it had a better chance with different things not going against it, and, with the production values and things that, developed, it probably would have definitely been more successful. I mean, it was literally 4 years after classic Star Trek had been canceled. Science fiction was definitely starting to get its start. I mean, we had the science fiction television shows of the 1960s, and the 70s was definitely a new era, and it was really trying to have its own. It was being advertised from my readings that it was hard science fiction, not so much soft, where it wasn't dealing with so much fantasy, but dealing with, science fact, and at least trying to come across that way. Would you
I
agree?
mean, well, yeah. I mean, you look at the science fiction, especially in literature in the late '60s. You had some really seminal works. You had Dune, you had Slaughterhouse-Five, you had Left Hand of Darkness, all in that era leading up to it. I mean, you had Star Trek. It went towards the thinking man's science fiction, or thinking persons. Let's be politically correct here.
Yeah.
But it went in that direction. So there was obviously an audience for it. But how do you do that on a television budget? I mean, that's the big thing.
Which kind of ties into, some of the things we're talking about here, because with the budget, I mean, what they were trying to do is, with the sets themselves, they were trying to cut down on what they were doing as far as having to spend a lot of money. And Douglas Trumbull had come up with, they had what was called the Magic Cam. And with this was going to allow you to incorporate live action with the models. And by doing that, it would be almost groundbreaking, because you would be able to not spend as much money on the effects, or even, the studio having to utilize different things. Unfortunately, there were problems that plagued it from the beginning with this, and it wasn't working to the way that they actually had envisioned. And as a result, the show really depended on blue screen technology. And unfortunately, it came through in as far as like a production standpoint with the budgeting. And when you're watching these, these images, and, take place, you know that it's unfortunately looking not real. And I think that really hurt the production. And then on top of it,
well, I think there was a side to it as well. Yeah, it's great on paper. I don't have to build this massive set that people can walk through. I can just build it in miniature and have a small camera and go through it. And that's going to save me a ton of money. But you don't factor into the idea that if you're going to build a small set, it's got to be very detailed. It's got to be very meticulous. You look at the stuff that Jerry Anderson did. I mean, those were fantastic miniature sets and models and stuff that they spent hours on. I don't think they had factored in that other cost that they would have to do. And the result was, well, some of the sets looked a little bit like your model train set, quite frankly.
Yeah, I just want to say hi to some of our viewers out there. Hi, Mary Beth. Thanks for joining us. Marianne, thanks for being here. We have Mike Rizzo. Mike's saying a big spaceship with different domes. Each dome is a different society. The heroes travel from dome to dome. Yeah, and that's very true, because I mean, it was almost like you had a city or a town that was in each section, and it was almost like a part of the world was captured and put onto this giant spaceship. And it's amazing that something this vast and this big could be constructed. And unfortunately, it was set out, and with the premise of this show, it's out in space, and then there's an accident that takes place. And we learned that it's one of the reactors had been damaged, and different areas of the ship had been damaged. And as a result, a lot of time went by, and as generations and generations passed, people forgot to, forgot where they were and what was actually going on. And it really gave me remnants of the classic Star Trek episode. And I'm again, all roads lead back to Trek, but the world top, I touched the sky with the world of Yanada. It kind of reminded me of that, where they didn't know that they were on an asteroid. I mean, that was one thing. And from a Space 1999 standpoint, when I was watching this for the first time and going through it, I couldn't help think of Mission to the Darians. Now, to be fair, this show was filmed in 1973, and Mission to the Darians was filmed in the latter part of 1974. So, it's fair, but so there is almost like a
plagiarism.
Yeah, I don't know if any 1999 fans want to jump in on that, if they have any comments to say, but I did definitely pick up on those similarities.
And if no one has seen the actual model, the model that Doug Trumbull made was unbelievable. I forget the actual size of it, but it was I think 15 or 20 feet long. It was incredible. And if you haven't seen it, if you've ever seen the film Silent Running, it's very much based on the Valley Forge. The domes look very similar to that, but it's just a massive model, and probably one of the best things about the about the series.
It's a shame too, because we really don't get to see that model to the extent that we probably could. It would have really been great. I mean, we see different shots, and they do some exteriors, but again, it's kind of here and there, and it's almost like they try not to get too close because they don't want to give anything away. I mean, again, there were budgetary limitations. Dennis, thanks for joining us. Dennis is saying the Ark model is used in the episode Far Things in Comet as a ship model. So he's indicating about that in one of the rooms. Chris Paulson, I love the idea of a world ship. Yeah, Chris. Hey, how's it going, Chris? Thanks for joining us. It's true. It's almost, you have literally a civilization, and it really left it open for a lot of different types of stories. And some of the stories that they dealt with were sort of almost political in nature, and maybe that was because of the times. I mean, the third episode that they actually filmed, and showed, was called The Goddess Calabra. And with that episode, Rachel, who is one of the three main characters, is thought to be a representation, or they think she is a god. And when they see the statue of her, they can't help but think this is actually her. And it's in an environment where it's all men. All the any women that were there had left or were excised. So, and they do their repopulation through genetic engineering, so to speak, where they are able to reproduce, which is another thing. And interesting enough, John Colicos is in that episode as the governor, and then you also have Barry Morse, who's playing the High Priestess. So you have two iconic science fiction actors, both Canadians too, that are in the same episode, and it was really, really kind of cool to see them together.
Well, no, they did have some. They had some really good guest stars. I don't think we've mentioned to this point, but Walter Koenig was in 2 episodes as the alien Oro, who's the only alien I think we ever see on the show. No, sorry, that's not right. But he's certainly the only alien that gets onto the Ark, and it's interesting because he seems to be trying to play a very emotionless, intellectual alien, and it's sort of somewhere between Bester and Spock in some ways. Yeah, sort of a combination thereof.
Yeah, he's very subdued. And what's interesting too is it's the choices that these 3 actors make in this show. And a lot of it can be contributed to the writing too, because I mean, at the star of the series, we have Keir Dullea, and he was known for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and as well as other things that he had done. And you have his interactions being on a very subdued level. And even with the other 2 characters, I mean, you have, he's playing Devon, and then you have Rachel, and then you have Garth. And they were almost living in a biosphere, which really reminds me almost of like the Amish. It's very simple.
Absolutely, Amish.
Yeah, and it's just, there's no mechanizations. And then what happens is David, discovers and feels that, there's more out there, and he wants to go. He's in love with Rachel, and Rachel's supposed to be married to Garth. And there's that kind of triangle that's going on throughout the entire, series, or at least the first half. I mean, it's very strong in the beginning. And, he's going to venture out, and then of course Rachel goes, and then what happens is Garth is going after them to try to bring them back. But then it's almost like the 3 become like this, these 3 friends that are trying to find out what's going on with the ship, how they can correct it. And that's almost their course of the mission, to try to, get to the control room, get to the bridge. And then along the way, they're having all different types of adventures. And, whether it be meeting different individuals in the ship, which is almost like different societies. It's almost like you're going to a different country in some areas, or different states. And it's a very interesting premise. And I really think that they definitely could have done a lot with this.
No, I'd love to see Stravinsky do Stravinsky? No, I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. like to see James Michael do something with that. I think that sort of arc that they had on Babylon 5 would have been very interesting, where it's a combination of episodes, but there was a definite beats that the story had to hit over the episodes. I think that would have been a really good match with the concept here.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's an excellent point. Yeah, I just want to say hi, Diane. Thanks for joining, Diane. And Rob Barnes. Rob, thanks for joining. And we have Martin out there. Good to see you. Dennis is commenting that the arc is 200 miles long and 80 miles wide. That's interesting. And it's funny.
That was something that was never really done well. It was 80 miles wide, and if you see the picture of it, you've got at least, you know, the main hull and about 4 biodomes across, and yet they were talking about Cypress Corners, where the 3 main characters come from, as being it would take 2 or 3 days for a person to walk across the dome. So it's like, I don't think that scale quite works, but
yeah. So I think they, you know, it kind of got lost in the translation. And I think, you know, with this series, and I'm not trying to, and to be honest, again, I'm not trying to be negative with it, because one of the things I really enjoyed about watching this show is it really reminded me of what it was like, you know, watching television in the 1970s. I mean, we are on this show, we are celebrating and we are remembering, you know, shows that we, you know, that we watched, you know, when we were younger, or we maybe even grew up with, and, you know, shows that, you know, we, you know, felt close to at the time and maybe feel close to now. So with this show, for me, it was interesting because I had never heard of it on a certain level, you know, in passing, but then again, more and more my friends, yourself included, would, you know, mention it to me. And then I, you know, really felt the need to find out more about it. And then that's what I did that last year. And then, you know, it was something that had come up as far as, you know, talking about for the show. And I definitely enjoyed, you know, having the opportunity to kind of explore and get into, you know, the nitty gritty, so to speak. And it's interesting too, because every production, and it doesn't matter what it is, always has its backstory. Sometimes it can be really, you know, on a positive level. Sometimes things go negative. I mean, you're always dealing with the budget, no matter what you're dealing with. So things can, you know, either make you or break you. But I really think that given the opportunity, the show definitely would have had a lot of potential. It's just a shame that it wasn't a little bit more thought out, and shows in the 1970s, you know, really weren't good with having chronological events happen as far as references to past episodes. There was the opportunity for that with this series, and it really, really didn't happen all too much. And it would have been really kind of cool if they did. But again, it was part of the time. And Bruce, you and I were talking too. There was a writer's strike that took place between March and June of 1973, which I'm sure, you know, added to some of this as well.
Well, it's interesting because you know, concepts that they didn't do well in the 60s and 70s were the quest shows, because at some point, you know, why didn't Gilligan and everybody get off the island? You know, why did, you know, the show would be over, of course, if they were able to succeed in that. So it's the same sort of idea, and that's where I think that, you know, modern TV has been able to do that chronological, you know, move the story forward without actually ending the show.
Right.
And it would be really interesting to do a remake of, you know, this concept in the present day and see what they could do with it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot that could, you know, come out of it, especially if, you know, with the pre-planning and the pre-production, and, you know, with the use of, you know, the technology that's available right now. Garth is commenting. Hi, Garth. Roy agreed. Watching the show in the 70s, saw it in a low res broadcast TV. Didn't really notice the low production values until I revisited it this week. Yeah, no, that's true too, because I mean, with high definition TVs now, I mean, we can really scrutinize. Although, if you're watching something like even on your iPhone, you can still see things that maybe you normally wouldn't have seen maybe in the 1970s when you were watching on television. So you're right about that, Garth. To be fair, I mean, we definitely pick up on different television shows, and it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, you can definitely see things a lot clearer. Ennis is saying that they filmed it in a TV studio with small sets because they're relying on the Magicam and models that did not work out, so they had limited room to build sets. Yeah, you're right, Dennis. And we were talking about that earlier because the whole point was that they wouldn't have to, expand upon the sets, that they would be able to use that technology. And unfortunately, that technology did not work the way they wanted it to. And then they didn't have the time to, build what they really needed to, which is a shame.
Before we went on, I mean, we were talking about the fact that on the first episode, the Magicam was used so predominantly. I mean, practically every shot had an aspect of Magicam. And then by the last episode, nothing was being done by Magicam anymore. So it was an interesting evolution there.
Right. And with the set design too, it was interesting too, because when you go down those corridors, it just had that certain look to it.
What look is that, Roy?
It was that look of blue screen technology. But you know what I did enjoy too? It was really cool to see a lot of familiar faces. Now, for a production like this, I mean, you had a lot of actors that we knew from that time. I mean, in fact, I'm going to throw this out there. We'll do the Star Trek connection. Can anybody, without Googling, tell Bruce, what actors from classic Star Trek besides Walter Koenig appeared in this show? And there were actually a total of 4, including Walter. So if anybody knows, that's our first trivia question for right now. And yeah, that piece of it was pretty neat. And then we also have the Battlestar Galactica connection, because we had John Colicos that we were talking about a little while ago, which is kind of cool. And even his acting is very distinct, and even the way he enunciates, and then he has like this sinister laugh. You hear it come through, and it was kind of cool because he really is a good actor. I mean, he was a very good actor, and he just, the way he came across everything. And the fight scene that he did have with David at the end, though, was it was somewhat amusing, but it was again, a product of 1970s television.
Oh, come on, he could chew the scene better than anybody.
Yeah. He really
now did. The one you're talking about enunciation, you've got to talk about the guy who played the computer. What was his name again? It was William Osler.
Yes.
And I mean, he did the computer. He did the intro. He did pretty much any sort of non-human voice on the thing. And he had such a distinct way of delivering a line. I don't want to say it's almost Shatner-esque, but he just had a way of his tempo and stuff was extremely interesting.
No, it was, and he made that his own. I mean, his voice was very distinct, and you knew when he was speaking, and you knew who he was just the way he came across. Oh, Diane is chiming in. She said that Percy Rodriguez. Yes, Percy Rodriguez was one of the actors in the series that was from classic Star Trek. And he was in the episode Court Martial playing Commodore Stone. So yes, that is one of the actors. You know who the other 2 actors are? We gave one away earlier. I already mentioned his name besides Walter, but then there's also another actor. And we'll give it 30 seconds there because we have to see. And if it comes up, because we are on a delay here. And then also, even with the writing too, Bruce, there was writers from classic Star Trek as well as from Lost in Space, which is kind of interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, are we going to leave that as a trivia question, or should we talk about that?
Well, you know what? Let's see if anybody responds to that. If they don't, as far as trivia, then we can dive into that.
And if you can't get the name, can you get the episodes that they did of Star Trek?
Rob is asking about the bee episode, the Beehive episode. Yeah, that was very interesting, Rob, to say the least. And I'll be honest with you, it kind of reminded me of the Outer Limits episode a little bit, because it just, with dealing with bees. I mean, it was not similar, but it was, well, not exactly the same, but it was similar but different, I guess, if that makes any sense. But yeah, that was an interesting choice. Oh, Mary Beth is saying besides Harlan. Yes, Mary Beth, besides Harlan. There were actually
Not Harlan.
2 other writers. Yes, yeah, that's true. It was Cordwainer Bird, and everybody knows why he used that name, right? Harlan Ellison was very unhappy about what had happened when this was being released, production values of everything with the show, and how he felt that the character development was not coming across the way he liked. And what he would do, as many of you probably know, is what he would do is use his pen name, which was Cordwainer Bird, and for the reasons, of his last name, it was pretty much saying that he didn't want to acknowledge his, real name being used. It's flipping the bird, as Francois is saying. Paul Steimer is correct. Antoinette Bauer, Sylvia from Cat's Paw. Yes, she is one of the other actresses, along with John Colicos, Walter Koenig, and Percy Rodriguez. Mike saying Harlan is generally unhappy about everything. But his work was amazing. We have to say that. We definitely have to say his work.
Absolutely. Now, what he did was he supposedly took his original script and turned it into a novel called Phoenix from the Ashes, which is supposed to parallel the first episode. But I haven't picked up a copy. I'd love to take a look and just compare what he did. Sort of like City on the Edge of Forever, where there was the film version and his version that they produced in a novel form. Be interesting to see.
You know what's interesting about that too, Bruce? I actually heard that he won the 1974 Writers Guild of America award for that. So
yes,
he was something. I mean, he really did a lot of things that really were award winning. I mean, think about it. This movie Forever won the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation for 1967, although he wasn't too happy about it because of
My quick research was 5 Nebula, 11 Hugo, 18 Locus, and just keep going. So I mean, yeah, you may have some criticisms of him, but he hit the mark on a lot of things.
Yeah,
you can't dismiss him, that's for sure.
No, you can't. You definitely can't. Yes, Sue, I know. I see that a lot of people have given some answers out there too. We are on a delay, Sue, so that's part of the reason why that's happening. So we will try to be on point with everything there. What I'd like to ask, from our listeners out there and viewers is, what were your favorite episodes of this series? I mean, what really struck out with you? What memories of the show do you have that you recall? And I've heard a lot of people talk about this show and really smile when they hear the Starlost. So again, 1970s, early 1970s television was starting to form at that period of time. There was not a lot at that period, and this is essentially a classic. And I'm just curious what kind of memories you have with it. Interesting thing too, Bruce, this show was not available right away as far as being out on video and after syndication, and a lot of like other shows of that time period when the late 70s arrived, or even maybe the early 80s, what they tended to do was they would do compilations, and they would take the episodes and they would put part one, like almost part one, part two, or where they felt that the stories were somewhat reaching together and bridging them together. And I believe they actually did five tapes for this, and that
sounds about right. And they did that with a lot of shows. I mean, they did that with I think it was Space 1999. They did that even with, and certainly UFO and stuff like that. It was a fairly common practice. But yeah, I mean, it was not available. The other thing though is, again, in Canada, there was such a saturation because CTV syndicated the heck out of that thing for something that was only 16 filmed episodes. It went on for years. They were showing it at any time of the day type idea. So I think there was a market saturation there as well.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I mean, usually, at least in the States, they want a show to at least, have at least 3 seasons, because with that, if they're going to syndicate it and have it go out, it's going to generate, revenue for them as far as, for them to be able to show it. I mean, from Space 1999, that was one of the things that unfortunately, kind of hampered it a bit, because there were only 48 episodes. And to your point, there were compilations that they did. And, this is almost like the joke amongst the fans, because what they did was they had actress, B movie actress Sybil Danning, and very attractive. Not taking away from her at that time, but she was actually in this like almost like a bikini type spacesuit, and then she's got a laser rifle, and she's like talking space jargon and doesn't know really what she's talking about. And I actually remember purchasing those episodes, and it was painful to watch because they added extra music to them, and edited them certain episodes together. And I'd get to her part, and this is probably 30 some years ago, and it's like, okay, great to watch, but what, fast forward, and you'd watch it, and then you get to this point, because we've watched these shows over and over again, just like I'm sure with everyone has with Starlost. And you get to the point where the dialogue and everything, but you're hearing the music and everything, and it's like it makes you cringe, because what they've done as far as editing things together and things that shouldn't have been. But that's all we had, so it was either that or nothing to be able to watch these shows. And it's interesting though that this was saturated on the market, that they were showing it as much as they did. But after that happened, Bruce, did it just disappear then?
It just disappeared. I mean, somewhere in sort of the late 70s, it just absolutely disappeared. And it wasn't until probably, when YouTube started getting popular, let's say 4 or 5 years ago or something like that, that you could actually look it up and catch a few episodes on YouTube. Right now, all the episodes are available. And in preparing for this, I've been binging a little bit, watching a few. I started with the first, went to the last, and now I'm sort of filling in the middle. So it's bringing back certain memories, that's for sure. Real nostalgia trick.
To me, that's really cool, because then you can really relate to when you saw them years ago and what you remember from them, and then watching them now. Oh, Mike's jumping in. Yeah, Roy, you aren't supposed to be listening to Sybil, just looking. Yeah, I know, Mike. I was just trying to downplay that. I mean, it was like 30 years ago. I'd lie if I wasn't. Yeah. That's true. Phil Merkel. Hey, Captain Phil is out there. Thanks for joining us, Phil. Appreciate it. And your comment just went off my screen, and I just missed it. It wasn't fast enough. I will circle back with you, Phil. Warren is saying, hey, Warren, thanks for joining us. Harlan wrote a few B5 episodes as well, I believe. And Rob Barnes, Sybil had some great outfits in Battle Beyond the Stars. And then Garth is saying, Bruce, I agree. It totally disappeared. Yeah, it's just amazing how, things like that happen. It's saturated and then boom, it's gone. Now, let me ask you a question, Bruce. From the episodes when you watched them when you were a kid, now you're watching them now. I mean, do you remember them the same way, or were there ones, I mean, I know you haven't seen all of them recently, but what kind of memories did it bring back to you from watching it?
Well, I mean, again, you remember, I remember the computer. That's the one thing that's indelibly etched into my head. The, can I be of assistance? And that's it's sort of, as you say, live long and prosper. It lives on way after you forget the actual scene that it was in, or anything along those lines. So that was one. I mean, as a kid, I think everybody had a crush on Rachel. But again, I don't remember any of the stories in particular. I mean, I was a Trek fan, so I remember Walter being on and stuff like that. Certainly, again, I like Battlestar Galactica, so I remember John Colicos. So you remember some of those guest stars and stuff like that. But the stories, I really had to sit down and remember and rewatch them.
Right. Now, yeah, which totally makes sense. Dennis is saying, yeah, he seemed the same as I remembered pretty much. Diane said that, not her. Warren was replying to Phil about a cameo. I believe, I'm not sure who. Warren, who are you referring to in regards to the cameo? I apologize. I lost the post that mentioned. Interesting to know who the cameo was that he was referring to. Yeah.
So I got a trivia question for you, Roy.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I am, depending upon your extreme knowledge, Bruce, with this series, I wanted to discuss it because I thought it was really fun. And also it's part of our history, and it was neat to explore it and to learn about it. And, it's part of our 70s television sci-fi.
Absolutely.
As they say.
So Robin Ward, who played Garth, what is he best known for, especially in the Toronto area? I think we discussed this earlier, but I'll throw it out there for the audience.
Yeah, that's a good question. Good trivia question out there. Let's see what they come up with. Also, one person I did not mention earlier was Ben Bova. He is a science fiction author, and he was actually like a consultant on this show too, which they were really trying to give the show a lot of credit in regards to that. Jumping in, Warren got a game show host. Is that the correct answer?
That was one of the things.
Oh, he was known for something else. What was it, Warren, or anybody else in Canada?
Certainly, he was a game show host.
Besides being a game show host. He had a huge crush on Rachel, but happily married now for 42 years, so trying to erase those memory banks. Harlan Ellison cameo on B5. Well, that's interesting. And Rob is saying the same thing as well, too. Yeah, Ben Bova, Mike. Believe it or not, he was a creative consultant. Warren is saying
he was
being a porn star. No, I don't think that was it. Diane's got it though. Wasn't he on the news station? I think she's close. What do you say, Bruce?
He was a weatherman for almost 20 years in the Toronto area.
That's pretty interesting.
After his game show host career.
So he went from being an actor to a game show host to a weatherman. That's pretty cool. You know what? You're still in, it's a form of entertainment where you're in that genre. So kind of, you're in the public's view, so to speak. It's just that it's on a different level, different performance, so to speak. So that is kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Rob is saying he remember the controls from the doors, like they look like vacuum form bowls. You know what I found interesting when I was watching this? It was just the way they would be clicking the different control panels. I would have to agree with you, Rob. And some of the dialogue too. The writing of a lot of these episodes was kind of stilted, but again, I think it was maybe that period of time. I don't know. I think it was the way they were trying to come across with different episodes, but it just had that seriousness to it. And there's been shows that have been accused of being too serious. Space 1999 being one of them. Especially in the first season. And then they tried to change that for the second season, which was one of the, changes that needed to be made. But I think that the three had that chemistry, but there could have been so much more that could have been done with these characters. But again, hindsight is 2020. We're looking back on something that was filmed 47 years ago. So it's easy, from this point of view to really comment on it. Wouldn't you say?
Do you think there was an influence from 2001? I mean, Keir Delay was in that, and Dave Bowman was rather a quiet. There was great pauses in between the dialogue and stuff. Is that a leftover from that? I don't know.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Similarity in characters. Except for the the long hairstyle, which and
the mustache.
And the mustache, yeah, that's true. Oh, Paul's jumping in. He's saying, who played the spear projector information guy? And
who?
Yeah, he's asking who played the spear projector information guy in the show.
William Osler. And I thought, boy, that with a guy with that kind of delivery and stuff like that, he must have done a ton of other stuff, and really, he didn't.
He really didn't. That's interesting.
No.
Arth is saying, followed by them using cheap green foam pads throughout the series. Cheapest recurring panels for 7 or 8 button panels. Yeah, it was limited. But interesting enough, and Bruce, I don't know if you did this. This was something I used to do with some of my friends in the early 80s. My friend Joe Metz and his cousin Ross, my friend Joe Brickman, and we'd get our friends and neighborhood friends together, and what we would do is we'd write and make science fiction movies. And what we would do is we'd Super 8 film and, just go to town on it. We actually would script them. And then what we would do is we'd film them, then we'd be splicing it together. And then what we would do is we would scratch the film and, make laser images and things like that. And it kind of watching this show kind of gave me flashbacks of that because, and I'm not saying as far as, production, but it's just that just the way we did certain setups and everything. It just reminded me of the times. Again, it's very 70-ish, which it obviously is. But did you ever do anything like that when you were growing up?
No, I was never that creative. No, I was your typical nerd in your basement, reading and watching TV and stuff like that and stuff. So no, didn't get out and do the camera stuff. Not at all, unfortunately. Sounds like a lot of fun though.
It was different.
Yeah.
It was just a different way of being nerdy though, so it's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Worth saying, Keir Delay, can you imagine the downfall having been directed by 2001 and then being directed in Starlost directors? Yeah, I mean it's just definitely going from one venue to the other. So you can say.
Did you ever meet Keir when he was in Ticonderoga?
No, I didn't. I should have. I went up to him and I said hello, but I didn't really get to talk to him and exchange with him. How about yourself?
Well, it was very interesting because him and Gary Lockwood, I mean, you could not get two more different personalities. Keir is a real artiste, if you will, not in a bad way, but he takes his craft very, very seriously. And Gary Lockwood is like, look at the amount of money they're paying me just to sort of stand around and say lines.
Yeah.
So, can you imagine a real artiste going in and being directed and on some of this stuff? It must have been a real culture shock for him.
Yeah, it's probably true. And it's funny you're talking about that too, because the two of them were actually at the Chiller Theater Convention years ago, and that was the first time I went up to Gary Lockwood. It's probably about 10 years ago, and it was so funny because Gary Lockwood, he just basically says what's on his mind, and just he just goes to town and he just basically spills it out, and he doesn't care. It doesn't matter who's around or what's around or anything. And some of the stories, which I'm not going to repeat, it was just interesting just to to hear him be very vocal, and but he was very friendly and he was great with the fans, and that's at the end of the day, that's what's really important. But to your point, Delay really seemed just very subdued. Seemed like a really friendly guy, but just not quite as animated. So you hear about his artistic, appreciation of the arts and everything. I could totally see it. Really see him drawing upon that actually from his characters too.
Now, we haven't mentioned it on here, but I think we've both seen it. There's a very interesting thing on YouTube, which is the promo, the ad that they use to sell the series to potential stations and such, and it features Keir centrally. I mean, he's the main guy, and because Doug Trumbull comes off of Silent Running probably just the year before, they use a lot of Silent Running footage in there as well. But it's a really interesting take when we're talking about the pedigree of this series and where it went. It's very interesting to watch and see how they were pitching it and such.
It's interesting. Yeah, so that would be something to definitely check out. Actually,
and it's very interesting to see Keir in his sort of Garth length of hair with the mustache in a suit. There's a culture clash there.
How it doesn't seem like the two really go together, but with the times and when it was photographed and everything, and it really, I guess it is more appropriate than one would think, right?
It was the 70s, come on.
Definitely. So which episode do you remember the most, and would you say was your favorite, if you could answer that?
Me? Yeah. I'm going for the first episode, Voyage of Discovery. To me, it set everything up. It was well done. It introduced the characters. A little bit too much use of the magic cam, but from a story point of view, it really held together, and it was nice. It was interesting if you think about it as a pilot episode, how they framed it, because they actually start the episode with them standing on the bridge looking out over all the domes and just being in awe. I mean, remember, these are Amish characters. I mean, Garth's a blacksmith, you know, and they're standing on this bridge looking out. That's the first scene you see. And you go, what the heck? They're, you know, they're dressed in these sort of Amish clothes and they're standing on the, and you go, what the heck? And then it goes back and builds the story back up to that period. So I really enjoyed that one. I actually can still watch that one on a regular basis.
Yeah, and you know what, Bruce, that really ties into, it makes one of the points I wanted to bring up too. They could have really ran with that piece of it because they weren't exposed to that. I mean, it would almost be like, I mean, you know, if taking the Amish, I was contributing people, you know, but having, you know, an Amish community, if you went into the community and then you expose them to, you know, extraterrestrials or, you know, space flight, space transportation, you know, things that are really super sophisticated, because obviously they know the different things that, you know, are outside of their village area and everything. It's just that they, you know, made the choices not to utilize them. But it would have been really interesting that as the show developed, and, you know, especially when they would encounter some of the aliens that, you know, they did, well, Walter, you know, Walter's character, and then they also encountered another. But if they had really delved with that and had appeared to be more almost like shell-shocked when being exposed to these individuals, because, you know, that was outside of their realm, and it really would have deepened, I think, the character development. But unfortunately, I think the track that it was going down, they were really getting away from it, and it was almost like the writers were coming up with stories that would almost be the story of the week, and which, you know, they're dealing with a conflict, which worked in some situations, but I think they didn't expand upon it as much. And that was part of where I think the show faltered.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting ones, I mean, one of the things is at the beginning, Rachel spoke in a very Amish dialect. She used more very formal speech and stuff like that. You know, it didn't use a lot of contraction, and then it got a lot more casual very quickly. They dropped that. But one of the interesting episodes was the first Walter one, where they come in and Garth meets this female technician who's helping Walter's character rebuild his ship. And it would have been nice to play up that shell shock type idea. They toyed with it because, you know, well, what are you doing? You look like you're doing stuff that Garth would normally do. You should be churning butter and milking the cows and stuff like that. And but then you get into hey, Garth, could you pass me the fuse? And he reaches up and he grabs something off the table, you know, and hands it to her without any question about what a fuse is or anything like that. So it was a bit of a mixed message. It would have been nice to explore some of that, as you say, that shell shocks type idea.
Yeah, definitely. And he really was beginning to develop feelings for that character in that episode. And it, you know, he you know, initially, I mean, he was really in love with Rachel and he wanted to be with her and everything. But then, you know, he was obviously,
he wasn't in love with Rachel.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't in love with Rachel. He was beholden to Rachel for genetic reasons, almost a Logan Glenn type thing. So, you know, he was beholden. That was the arranged marriage, and he realized that she loved Devon, and that they could never be more than sort of friends. But he did feel protective of her, and that's why he went after her. But
Gotcha.
yeah, no, there was never the feelings there, which I thought made it really interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. And when I watched it, that was last year, so I remember me correctly. So thank you for correcting me on that and pointing that out. And that even ties in more so than with what everything that was going on too. Oh, Catherine. Hey, Catherine, thanks for joining us. I've been lurking and wanted you to know that I'm here supporting you. But well, she's saying, I don't know jack shit about this show, but now I have added to my watch list. You know what? Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. And I'm glad you're on watching with us and you know, here to support our show. And then also the fact that you are going to check it out. I mean, that makes me happy, because when I hear people that say that, you know, they've actually come on here and they haven't watched some of these shows in such a long time, and they are going to check it out. That really makes me happy, because that, it's adding something to do that they haven't done before. So, with some of these things, so that's great. Watch the episodes on YouTube. Warren's reminding you that. Also, Captain Phil pointed out earlier that Harlan was very upset too, because he said that Harlan wanted them to find the bridge at the very last episode, and the fact that they found it at the beginning really annoyed the heck out of him, and that's part of the reason why he pulled out as he did. So, wanted a comment from Captain Phil. So thanks, Phil, for that. Dennis is saying the Ark is heading for a sun-off course in the main theme of the series. Yeah, and that's another great point too, Dennis, because here, when they have the opportunity to meet a couple of the other races, they really don't ask for help about that. It's almost like that kind of gets sidelined a little bit, and that is really the main purpose. I mean, they're trying to get to now it's like the backup bridge in order to get things corrected, and some of those points get deviated. So it show kind of went off structure a little bit with that. But I think, again, we know part of the reason why.
Yes, it wasn't a sun, it was a Class G solar star.
That would make a difference,
I guess. Which is really interesting, because they also say that the Ark is supposed to be finding a G-type star to find a habitable world. So,
yeah. This is true. Oh, Phil's asking for help. You reminded me of the Traveling Moon series. Traveling Moon series. I don't know what you're talking about. What could that be? Garth is commenting, for those wanting to rediscover or newly learn, there's a dedicated Roku channel to Starlost episodes. So yes, there you go, as far as checking that out. One other thing that came to mind too that we didn't discuss, where there was a form of continuity that was lost too, Bruce, was in the costuming. When they left, they were wearing their garb, that they essentially were wearing, all the time. But then there are episodes where they're wearing almost like these silver type of spacesuits, and then they wouldn't be wearing that in future episodes. So it was kind of weird how that kind of came to be. Now, I mean, obviously they could have found them somewhere and it maybe just wasn't shown, but then what would happen is they would switch back and forth. So I guess maybe it was the natural course of events, because what? I mean, you're something for a long period of time, you're not going to really want to wear it without having it washed. So, I mean, that's something that no television show really dealt with. The only one that really came close that I can think of is Lost in Space, when Maureen Robinson decided to be the first season, like midway through, where she was going to change their tunics, and said that they felt that there was time for a change, and then what they did was did a redesign. But essentially, no one ever sees anybody going to the saying, "Oh, you know what? I got to go to the ship's bathroom." It just never happens really in, and it's like, just a thought out there to laugh at.
Yeah, it could have been something like Crusade, where they switched uniforms partway through the series and then showed the episodes out of order, so it really got confusing. But that didn't happen on this one.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, the other episode that was kind of interesting, and I want to rewatch it because I haven't watched it in a while, was one where they come along and they find the kids who are sort of cadets, and they're training, but they think they're actually controlling the ship.
Children, and Ursula.
Well, to me, one of the talking about another series, but another Canadian series, but a little later on, Andromeda. One of their best episodes was when they come across these children descendants of the High Guard, and they're sort of keeping the fires lit. And I'm just wondering how much of a crossover, how much of the same idea is in both episodes. I'm putting that on my list for this weekend to take a look at.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually checked part of that out. Oh, Paul saying think pain. Warren saying Deanna Troi changed her outfits often too. Yeah. And in space, no one can smell your PJs or your pets. Excuse me. Yes, this is true, Phil. But
I think from a production point of view, a bunch of people walking around in Amish clothes, I'm sure somebody said, shouldn't they be in something a little more spacey?
I'm sure that's what happened. What they should have done was they just should have kept it with consistency. There was a point that was actually something that I did notice when I was watching it, and it was something that I had also read about. But I think it's interesting too, the episode that you talked about, the one with the children of Methuselah. A lot of science fiction deals with children in capacities having powers or being the central focus, and this is another example of where this is being done. So it is not a bad episode, and it was interesting as far as why the children had not aged and why did they have the control of the systems as they did, and as you watch it, you'll find out. So it's very interesting.
We never did get an answer to our question about the writer from Star Trek. I don't think.
No, we did not. In fact, and I don't think I saw it come through. So, does anybody remember who or know who the writers are that were a part of classic Star Trek? I will give you another 20 seconds before we give the answers away on that. And again, there were actually three writers. One was uncredited, so the trivia would really go for the two, but was something that we came up with when we were digging deep into the Starlost. Paul is saying on the space station, and Sue is saying, thanks, Garth, we'll check it out. We have Ruko. No, Paul, not DC Fontana. That is actually a good guess, but she was not one of the writers. A hint, it was from this individual wrote 2 first season episodes, and he also wrote another episode of Star Trek, but it was not for the classic series in 1966 to 1969. That's a big hint. That's for one of the writers. And then the other writer also directed as well as wrote classic Star Trek. And then the other writer had done Lost in Space. That's another big hint for that. No, Mike, it wasn't DC Fontana. Warren is saying Theodore Sturgeon. Harlan, yes, Harlan was one of them, obviously. You're right. Hey, Martin, not DC Fontana. We gave everybody enough time, Bruce?
I think so.
I do too.
You say it because I'm not sure how to pronounce the name.
Okay. Paul Schneider, and he wrote Balance of Terror, Fire of Gothas, and then he also did the Turretin incident for the classic Star Trek animated series. So yes, those are the writers. And then also for Lost in Space, it was Simon Winselberg. He actually wrote the opening pilot episode, and the first 5, the ones that were part of the whole pilot. And then
and Shyman also wrote Dagger of the Mind, and the Galileo, partially wrote the Galileo 7.
Yes, that's right. I forgot totally about that.
He was actually the one I was talking about. So there.
And then also John Meredith Lucas, who wrote and directed classic Star Trek episodes. He also was one of the writers, but he was uncredited in the series. So, but as far as actors, though, we were talking about Walter Koenig, we had John Colicos, we had Antoinette Bauer, we had Percy Rodriguez, Barry Morse from Space 1999, Simon Oakland. There was a wide range of different personalities out there. So and talent. So it's good to know that this show definitely bringing different individuals in and different along with Harlan and Kier, and just trying to really set out to be a show that really would do well. But unfortunately, things happened, and it is now being remembered 47 years later, which is really kind of cool. But it's just something that never hit the high levels that we probably had hoped to do.
Now, I don't know if somebody in the audience would know this, but I'm trying to figure this out because I see different pictures of the model for the Ark, and some of them have biodomes that are bent down. Others, when you look at it, they don't seem to have that. They all seem to be on the same plane or on 2 different planes, but nothing bent down. is that something that happened to the model, or is that was that part of the original design? I don't know. I don't know if anybody out there knows as well.
That's interesting. And you know what would be interesting is, did that model survive? I mean, is it still intact somewhere? Does Douglas Trumbull still have it? Unfortunately, from what I've, researching this show, a lot of the people that were involved with the show don't want to talk about the show. They don't have fond memories of it because everything kind of went sour. But I would be very interested to know. In fact, my one friend, Lou Place, who actually did work with me on this, he actually had the opportunity to meet with Doug Trumbull, I think, a couple of years ago. So next time I speak with him, I will check to see if that conversation came up with Starlost. I actually did not talk to Lou prior to doing this show with Bruce, but to me that would be kind of cool to find out if that ever came up in conversation, and if he brought it up, if it was anything he wanted to talk about or didn't want to talk about, or any type of memories he had. But I think that would be really cool. That was really interesting. Again, from Space 1999 standpoint, everybody remembers, fans out there, the mission of the Arians. It really kind of had a lot of similarities to that type of ship too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I remember mentioning the show to Walter Koenig one time. I was working autographs at a convention, and something came up where I said, "Oh yeah, and the Starlost." And I expected him to, get grumbly or something, or have some reaction. And all his reaction was, "Yeah, I hear that they're thinking they might be thinking of remaking that." I was like, "Whoa, okay."
At least it was a pleasant memory.
Yeah, I sort of dropped it as maybe this is one of the things that he'd rather forget about in his career, but no, he seemed fond of it.
That's kind of cool, though. That's very cool. Captain Phil is saying that I think the model was on display at the planetarium in Canada somewhere. Rob Barnes is saying the model was restored at one point. That's interesting. Garth is saying, Bruce, to your question on the biodomes, I have a full-scale model at my cottage. Oh, that's really cool, Garth. And Dennis said it's an observatory somewhere, I heard. So maybe it is still out there and it's just kind of lurking. Interesting. It would be very interesting to say.
But it's amazing where that silent running idea of the dome and stuff like that, how many times it showed up, because certainly silent running, and then the Ark was obviously based on that. And then there was actually ships in the original Battlestar. There was at least one ship in the original Battlestar Galactica with the same idea of dome.
The aggro ships, right? I remember with Count Ibley, Sheba's with him, and then she sees the ship of lights that are coming through, and he's telling her not to look at them, they're evil. And and he says, "You're safe with me," and he puts that evil smile, and then and he's got that grin, and his eyes are piercing. But they're in the it's almost like a hydroponic area, and it's all open. So yeah, absolutely, and that probably was the reason why that actually came up, because they were probably thinking in terms of this and silent running.
I've never. I should look that up sometime, but I was never sure if they reused the model of the Valley Forge in Battlestar Galactica is in its entirety, or if it was just a homage.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. It really does make you wonder. Good stuff. Good stuff. So, well, we're going to start to wrap it up. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and taking this memory trip, back to Starlost. Again, for me, I had never, like I said earlier, I had never watched the show, and I liked the fact that I got to learn something new about it, and it was something that, I got to experience because I had not had the opportunity to see it in the 1970s. So, Warren is saying, God, I cry every time I watch Silent Running and the one drone dies. Don't give it away, Warren. And Garth said, love Silent Running, saw that in Moose Jaw in theatrical release, one of the few in the theater. And then Michael Rizzo said in the 2004 Battlestar. It's a lot of good stuff out there. And, we're definitely going to be talking about a lot of other things coming down the pike And again, I want to thank Bruce. Bruce, do you have any final comments that you wanted to say before I start to wrap it up?
Just before you wrap it up, I'm hoping, as you said before, that we've sparked the curiosity of some people, and maybe you can't, you can only stomach a couple of episodes, but it is worth going out and checking out and just seeing, this series, because it is, I won't say it's a hidden gem, but it is a stepping stone in TV, and with a lot of familiar faces, a lot of writers, a lot of people behind the scenes. So yeah, check it out, at least 1 or 2 episodes.
Definitely. And if we're able to actually, spark an interest with, our listeners, and, want to check, different things out that you have not seen before, I mean, that really makes us happy from that standpoint, because it's just that, it's just kind of opening, the realm to other things. And, this 1960s and the 1970s was a great time for, it was like the forerunner of science fiction, things being developed. So I'm really glad that, we're helping to keep, interest sparked and what have you. Also, I just want to, wish everybody out there just, to stay safe. Crazy time out there, and, just we'll hopefully be through this sooner than later. And I'm just glad we can bring everybody together, whether it be for an hour, hour and a half, just to talk about, things that we love and enjoyed, whether it be in the past or currently. So I'm glad we were able to do that. I just want to put a pitch out there. Michael Rizzo and also Mary Beth Rakowski will be doing Sci-Fi Distilled on Wednesday, which will be May 6th. Please tune in at 7 p.m. to watch. They cover the science fiction of the 80s and the 90s, and it's a really fun show, and you get to just kind of hang out and talk movies and shows and just relax, actually do a drink. And I actually got to guest host on there with them on this past, talked about Flash Gordon, which was it was really fun to do. So it's a great time. Definitely check them out. And
I'm on there in a week and a half talking about Stargate SG-1.
Very cool. So definitely be out there for that. This Sunday, we are going to be doing a show. It's going to be at a different time. I want to let everybody know I'm going to be putting out the announcements and everything. We will be on at 4 p.m. this Sunday, and that's going to be Eastern Daylight Time. We're usually on at 7 o'clock like we are now, but on Sundays, it will be 4 o'clock on this coming Sunday. I am going to have a very special guest host, and that is going to be, he's known from Space 1999. He's Mr. Prentice Hancock, who played Paul Morrow on Space 1999. He's going to be joining us for the show. He's going to be my co-host on the show. I am very excited and very happy to be having him on. And we will be talking about Space 1999 Year One. And again, that will be this Sunday, and it will be at 4 p.m. And that is on May 3rd. So stay tuned, for that, and it should be a fun time. And he, Prentice has done a lot of stuff. He's known for his acting, career, and also not only in Space 1999 fandom, but he also was in the classic Doctor Who series. So definitely check that out. We're very excited, very excited to be having him on. It's just the same with all my co-hosts. It's just a nice time to keep things fresh and bring everybody together. So anyway, thank you so much, Bruce, for being a part of this. And
thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and look forward to doing this again with you too. So everybody, please take care, be safe, and live long and prosper. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Yes, I noticed that.